Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. He'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Today I'm joined with Nigel Wood, who's one of our part-time directors at Evoke Management. Nigel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I joined Evoke at the start of this year, but that's on the back of, quite a few years now of working in similar space with varying companies, from small tech companies through to large corporates that you've heard of. I've done quite a lot of retail, quite a lot of outsourcing and international work. So a fairly varied career, and joined the guys to see what new opportunities we could create.
Great, thanks, Nigel. And your skill set is really working with companies, working with the founders, and trying to help them improve the performance of the business in various ways. A friend of mine, Rory Underwood, who's a former England rugby player, he shared with me a kind of stat that he often shares, which I think is really interesting. He said in sport, like the game of rugby, teams spend about 90% of their time training for the 10% that they actually do the game, play the game that they're there for. And I think with business, it's really interesting that the majority of people spend 90% of their time doing the business and 10%, if that, on actually training and upskilling themselves. And I think when you think about that, there's some learning surely to be had from sport, from high performance teams that you see in sport or individuals that you hear performing well in sport, and how you can apply that to business. I don't know, Nigel, you've got a special relationship with the Paralympic Games. It'd be great to hear some of your learnings from that and what the connection is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to pick up on what you said there, Rob, in my experience, it's a rare company that spends 10% of its time developing the skill set of its people. They are few and far between. The number is often actually a lot less than that. And particularly in the past, maybe there might have been a lot of on-the-roll learning and sharing, mentoring. That's actually even more of a challenge in the climate we've got now, where there's this mixed economy of where people are actually working. But yeah, so I've been fortunate enough that one of my sons has been training with the Paralympic team for the last 5 years now. So for the Rio Olympics, he didn't go there, but he did get to Tokyo. Pulled in a bronze with the Paralympic canoe team based in Nottingham. Wow. It's a full-time role for him. It was exciting times. We weren't there to see it, but it certainly made me think a lot, the closeness I've had with them, of how did they end up as he ended up in the position that he is, and what support he's needed to get into that place. Because for all these athletes that operate at the elite level, it's not by accident, and it's not just by their commitment either. Stu, my lad, was, if you will, one of the athletes born of the 2012 Olympics, and that I took him to see the canoeing, and that's what prompted him to initially get involved when he went to university. But our success at 2012 was delivered on the basis of the investment decisions made a good 12 years earlier by Sport UK and the different foundations that exist to invest at that time and put the structure in place. There's been 2 or 3 key themes really, because he's been through the whole journey with them. The first thing I say is that there's an ongoing structure, which I think is key to this. That's been in play for a long time. I've got another colleague who runs the para tennis as well, who's been actively involved as the leader of that organisation for the last 15 years now, who talks very convincingly about this, that they put a structure in around coaching, support network that goes beyond what you might call the physical performance, because getting people to a certain place with one element of performance is part of it, but it considers all the other areas as well. So that there's, be they sports psychologists, how they plan themselves into events. And I think there's a piece in there that talks about they plan and structure themselves, understanding their clear goals that they've got, which are long-term goals. There's always short-term pieces, be it for in rugby, it's individual matches, or in the case of paracanoe, occasional events, there are big goals they're aiming at, which is probably true for most businesses that have a 2 or 3 year big goal in mind, and they put the structure in place to make sure they're going to get there.
So for the Paralympics, what kind of time frame are you talking about for these goals? You mentioned 12 years from that investment by Sport UK, but what other kind of goals are set there in terms of time frames?
Well, the Olympics is inevitably the largest event. There are world championships every year, so they run a 4-year cycle, but 4 years isn't long enough from start to finish for these planning events. So when Stu was talent spotted, which is what they tend to do by some of the distributed coaches that are out at club level, that was about 6 years before the Tokyo Olympics would have happened. And he was there at the Rio selection event, knowing full well he was not going to be going to Rio, which was quite an interesting day for us. And he's competing with all these colleagues. So their timescale runs out to that kind of. Now that's longer than a lot of our business planning cycles. Okay, so it's not suggesting that it's always going to be like that. But the point is, the foundation pieces need to take that long. And part of I think this is true if you're in business at whatever age of business. A planning horizon that develops your people to understand what you need your people to look like to achieve your goal, be it in 1 or 2 years' time, be it to release you to drive more sales and business, whatever it may be. Having that longer term goal and then investing in the right talent, which is probably the other part, the next bit that then comes in that says, having got the talent, they identified the talent, they do invest in it at an early stage. And the other 2 key themes that sort of weave together on this, one is investing in talent, and the other one is investing in success. So they have a talent program and they have a success program. I think we've all seen and heard in the news about how sports funding tends to follow medals, which it does. Okay, there's no question on that, and probably rightly so, because I think that's driven some our ongoing performance in both normal and Paralympics. But if the funds get tight, they still invest in talent, which is interesting. So quite a lot of sports have had funding reduced recently. Obviously, it's not been an easy couple of years for the UK generally in terms of cash spend. But they will cut back equally on the medal winners and their investment in that area to make sure they are still investing in the talent they need for the longer term. They're not just investing in the high rewards for today, which is an interesting take in business. My background is, if you will, operations and commercial generally, rather than having been sales in the past. So I have that generic chip sometimes of seeing businesses investing heavily in today's sales success, and rewarding sales for good reasons and good performance. But actually, the real long-term success is what happens with those clients over a 2-3 year cycle, and making sure that you're nurturing the teams that go beyond sales to deliver over the 2-3 years. But also, maybe it made me reflect on how do you reward sales teams on something that keeps them engaged in the process on a 2 to 3 year cycle, rather than just in short term, which in the industries I've worked in has tended to be the case. I've worked in a lot of deal-led businesses where winning the deal won the prize, if that made sense, both for the company and for the individual. And it didn't encourage necessarily the long-term engagement that you might want. So again, it's interesting. Invest in success, but invest in your talent at the same time.
So it's interesting what you say there, because one of a company that I've been working with, it's an accounting practice, a decent sized firm, mainly working with SME companies. And during the middle of the pandemic, during the lockdown, they were doing really well with new business. They were winning new business. They were taking business off some of the big 5 accounting firms and just picking up business all over the place. And I remember saying to them, what do you think the secret in this is? How are you managing to leverage so much during this period of lockdown and uncertainty? Yep. And one of the partners there just said to me, look, I'll be honest, it's got nothing to do with the pandemic. This is what we did 18 months ago. We had a plan 18 months ago that we had to go and ramp up the quality and the number of clients we had of a certain size, a certain demographic. And we put plans in place, and we're now seeing the results of that. And I think a lot of SME companies that I come across are very short-term focused, and it's very difficult to keep your head up and looking out beyond what's right in front of you. And And I think there's some really interesting points you mentioned there around how sports teams do this and how they constantly have to fill the pipeline of the new talent, the new performing stars, by looking for talent all the time, regardless of whether it's going to give a reward now. Yeah. And I think with any business, you know, as you look down the hierarchy of people with experience through the business, you know, your junior people, you've constantly got to keep dipping into those people and understanding where's the talent and where could they progress to. And I think I see a lot of companies struggling to hold on to talent in small companies because those people don't see necessarily the progression or the opportunity. Yeah. And I think it's a two-way street. You've got to have people junior and people senior trying to bridge that gap and trying to encourage and pick people up that are going to be the rising stars of the business in the years to come.
I mean, and absolutely, it's the nature of business that you will lose some of your talent, however hard you try to hold it. And if you try to hold it too much at the expense of encouraging and nurturing the talent below, then that can become a price that you pay. I mean, I've been working through with a different company, one of the companies I've been working with through the COVID experience of the last year and a half, who commercially have had a fairly successful period. They happened to find a niche that worked for them at that point in time. But they would admit now that they have systemically over a period of 3 to 4 years, almost since they evolved, depended far too heavily on the core 4 or 5 leadership of the business, which is fine when you're just starting. But when you get to that 12, 15, 20 member business, if you're not starting to develop your next level down, which certainly this organization did not, and almost saw them as interns that would turn through and they were a year cycle. They have a big gap now in organizational intelligence, and organizational capability to allow the leadership to move on to even bigger and better things, which is, you know, what they'll be looking to do. And it's also a big part of their reward and motivation. You know, I think even more so in the changing climate and the changing expectations of the younger generations. This is a period now where people, you know, want to learn and develop and enjoy that as part of the work experience. Mm-hmm. You know, that development from the point that they start, not necessarily with a clear end game for themselves, but understanding where the business is going, understanding how they can contribute within it, and understanding how they're going to get the skills they need to do that.
And in terms of that, it's also, you know, it's the asset of the business, isn't it? You know, you've got the asset there of people, of talent, and it's how do you get the best out of those people, you know, to make them do the best job they can and feed into that whole ecosystem of the business that's there. Have you, in your experience, seen any companies you've worked with that have really nailed that in terms of really having a great mechanism of, like the description of the Paralympics, you know, getting that talent constantly coming through and
Yeah, I can go back a very long time. If you want to the start of my career, I was lucky enough to hit the Marks and Spencer's management program, if I'm honest, from the commercial side when I was a young lad, about 23, 24, something like that. And that was absolutely, you know, and those were the days when the investment in the pipeline was absolutely central to what drove them to success and deliver a lot of that growth at that point in time. But if I reflect back of how they work now, and I still have a lot of contacts there because I did far too long, but I won't admit with them. They now have a different approach in some ways, and they also broaden their horizon to look at the pipeline outside their business. So they are actually keen that their leaders now, they've just taken in, I think, a new head of foods. I was with one of their food developers at the weekend. And the requirement was that person might have done some work within their business, but it was important that they'd also broaden their experience outside the business. So they were looking for people who they developed the talent themselves and had then taken the proactivity, if you will, to develop their own talent. So having gone through a very difficult period, maybe they're particularly on the food side starting to move into a slightly better spaces we're seeing. I still see way too many businesses that plan on a short-term cash basis though. And actually a lot of businesses in the last 18 months have gone through a period of survival or not, if they've not made it. And that has changed the focus. So this is, to me, this is a key issue now going into what will be the new dynamic and ways of working, and making sure we walk into it with a clear plan and it doesn't just happen to us. Because how we develop this talent, with some of it working remotely, is something that I'm keen to explore over the next 6 to 12 months, and already trying to get some thoughts together on that. The old regimes have been able to do as much face-to-face as you wanted in some ways, even if it didn't get done, or let a lot of it through learning at work in terms of by doing the task. Those are going to be more challenging to do, and you're going to need to deploy the right tools to keep that talent pool coming through, I think.
And you're right. And in terms of the doing this in a remote or hybrid environment, there's other challenges around that. And I'm seeing many companies kind of grapple with how best to do that. But to me, it's a combination of just making sure you've got the right environment for the right kind of meetings and discussions, and whether that's a meeting for training and someone needing to shadow someone, or whether it's a collaborative creative meeting. That doesn't have to be in an office environment. It can be somewhere else.
Absolutely.
But I think a lot of businesses need to kind of understand how best to do these to get the best out of it. I remember thinking back to some of the training I did right back in the day in my early career. There was a few concepts around different coloured kind of hats for thinking in different ways, and some companies used to kind of have different rooms coloured, different lighting. So you go into a red room or a green room, and I can't remember what those colours referred to, but it's just getting people into the mindset of, right, we want to think about the new products and the innovative part of what we need to do. Well, let's get into a creative space and do that.
Yep.
Some of the people that I'm talking to running companies, not being able to meet face to face, they've taken their board meetings out into the countryside and going for a walk. Let's have a half a day walk, talking about the important stuff that we need to. I think that's an environment appropriate for certain things. But then there's other stuff where you do need to get your younger people in the business engaged with the day-to-day and other people that they can learn from and do stuff from. So I think we've got some really interesting months ahead as people really understand how these things work and how to bring people together in different ways. And it's exciting. And it's also, you've got to learn from others. You've got to see, it's like sport, isn't it? Everyone is looking at your competition or looking at other people and how to kind of get those kind of small gains and all those things. I mean, the same applies to anything that we do, and attracting talent, retaining talent, educating talent, all of that. Look at what others are doing, learn from others. Getting external insights is so important. I think that's what we're going to see a lot.
I mean, it's an interesting that you pick back up the sport analogy there. If I reflect again over the past year, let's say the run up to the Olympics for the teams, and how did they sustain the coaching? Because for quite a while there, literally, they were in lockdown, the same as the rest of us. All their gyms were shut up as well. It didn't matter if they were elite athletes, and they didn't have any face-to-face access with their coaches and teams and that. But they weren't on their own, is the key point to me. And what it made more important was, it's okay to say you have this long-term plan and goals, but the shorter-term steps, understanding with some clarity, the 4, 8, and 12-week cycle that these guys were going through, and managing the inputs needed to those individuals working remotely. In this case, it was about what activity do they when they have medium, heavy, and light weeks type thing. From a diet perspective, from a psychology perspective, how do you keep people going? How do you motivate people remotely? Particularly at that point, they didn't even know if the goal was going to happen. It's not like there was a certainty of, in the nicest way, Tokyo happening. For a long time there, it wasn't. But everyone had to get ready anyway, okay? Just in case it did. And again, I think there's some learning there for leadership about how to manage the more short-term part of the business. I think most of us have figured out by now, or you should have done, how to just make the wheels turn round on their business, and how to deliver some of the day-to-day of what they were doing before. But it's what's your plan to deliver the growth, both for the business, for the individuals? What new skills do you need? What new skills do your leaders need? I mean, a common one I see, I've done quite a lot of work in in the service sector base and remote service. And most of the coaches and team leaders were recruited with a set of skills to do their coaching face-to-face, to do their management face-to-face of their individuals, to set goals, all these sort of things. And they weren't recruited or trained with the skills to do it remotely. And don't just assume it's the same and that people react the same when it's all done remotely. So again, it's about having a plan and understanding where the skill gaps are and how you plug those gaps, because there is a lot of help out there now. There is a lot of help. There's a lot of tools, and there's going to be a lot more different tools in a year's time. In fairness, it's clearly a burgeoning marketplace at the minute of people moving into to try and provide support in this space.
No, I think it's some great points there, and you're exactly right, Nigel. I think there's always help out there, and I think any person that sees this or knows of someone that's suffering or having these challenges in their business, in their teams, reach out, get some help. I know we're very keen at Evoke to talk to people, and we've got a number of tools that we think are easily applicable and easy to implement. And it's just having a conversation as a starting point and seeing what happens. We're gonna have to wrap this up because we're going to come to the end of the time slot for this. Okay. But Nigel, what are your top 3 takeaways from sports and business performance? What would be the top 3 things for anyone listening to this to take away?
Okay, my top one is identify your talent early, and followed closely by putting the structure in place to nurture and develop that on a longer term basis. And I would be identifying that talent on the basis of what my business goal was in my 2 to 3 year planning horizon. I would say maybe 18 months. If I'm much shorter than that, I'm not going to have time to develop the talent anyway. And most businesses do need that kind of view ahead. And the third part is then investing in the success. Okay, so don't be frightened of doing that in the right way. So understanding where good is, but rewarding it in a way that maybe will keep it with you, which is very much, again, how they manage it in sport. The reward they get from winning an Olympic medal, trust me, is not a financial one in the short term. They don't get a bonus for winning them, but it does affect their funding going forwards, and that's what keeps them going. So it's about the longer term reward for them. And I think about that in relation to my teams as well.
Great, thanks, Nigel. Those are awesome takeaways, and hopefully we can share this with a number of people and they'll get some good value out of it. So thanks, Nigel. Great to talk.
Good to talk.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.